In my last episode, I spoke about how I needed to focus in order to move forward with enjoying the climbing to be done in Glenpean. I must accept that I cannot do every route in this glen, there are far too many. I need to choose one at a time, so I returned with my sleeping bag in order to make the most of the dry hours before a big rain front came in, and I spent a very enjoyable night under a bright moon in the glen. My superficial objective was to scope out the north-facing side of the glen and identify good projects. A deeper objective was to continue the never-ending process of figuring out what I really want to get out of climbing. Now it was this overhanging wall that I remember finding before. 45 degrees, absolutely amazing. Easy to clean, of course. There's a kind of a flange, and you have to switch from layback in one way to the other way. It looks amazing. I'm just wandering through the boulder jumble. Check out that for a line. Now that is an arete. I don't know if you can tell the scale there. And the wall to the left is also an amazing line. Super high. I mean, that wall to the left could be an E8. Climbing provides so many separate strands of reward. The hierarchy of how each of us value them is obviously quite different for different climbers. It can even be different in the same climber at different times of the year or after some shift in perception. Perhaps you started out thinking that you just wanted to be in the mountains, but later realised it was sharing those experiences with friends that was really what was valuable. Climbing is a platform for many different games. I've got a bunny at least. In the past month, I've climbed 5 E8s. I enjoyed all of them immensely for many different tiny reasons. However, they were missing an ingredient that seems key in my climbing. I knew I could do those routes. And I feel that above all else, what I find most rewarding in climbing is the project that seems too hard at the outset. If I'm not genuinely scared by it, then perhaps a harder route will be even more rewarding. This is my first time exploring the south side, or the north facing side of Glenpean. I walked in yesterday, I carried in all my climbing gear and all my bivy gear and cameras, and it was really heavy. It was a bit too much really. I had a lovely night camping out last night. It was a really bright moon, so it was actually quite a bright night, and I feel much better this morning, much more rested and much more psyched for climbing. Unfortunately there's a massive front on the way. It's just coming up the glen at the moment. I think I've got about 3 to 4 hours before the rain hits, and then I'm going to have a very wet, miserable walk out. But that's fine, that's what I kind of came in for, was just to make the most of the dry weather. I don't really rate my chances of being able to clean a route this morning on that big crag up there, but what can you do? You've just got to get started and get as much progress as possible. I could have picked another kind of easier route to try that would only take one cleaning session and then just do it. But I just really like trying hard routes. I've always liked that. I've always liked going for like the hardest route I can possibly do. I just find that the process is just so much more interesting, and you have that uncertainty. Like, that uncertainty is key. It's like, well, I don't know if this will go. Like, that looks really tough. So I'm kind of starting to narrow it down to half a dozen objectives that look like ones that I would like to get on. But this is going to be a long process. I mean, it's into October now. I don't know how much more is going to get done this autumn. But we'll see. Sometimes October can be beautiful. And certainly I would love to be here in October, because it would be stunning. Just walking up the hill, I decided to kind of contour past this buttress, which is one of the more minor ones. So it has a nice kind of arete and cracked walls there, and then a big open wall there, about 25 metres. And I thought, oh yeah, there's easy routes there. And it does look like there are some easier lines, although they look bold. But on the left side there, there's a really blank looking wall, and you just think, God, I mean, that looks like it could easily be an E8 or harder. Looks like hardly in a gear, probably none. I find it really hard to focus because there's so much. I mean, I know that's like a ridiculous thing to say, I realise that. But I work best with my climbing when I'm sort of focused and systematic. You know, to climb a new route in this glen takes a lot of effort. So yeah, it takes a long time to get there, it takes a long time to clean these routes. You know, you walk in, you spend a day cleaning if it's a short route and it's already relatively clean. If it's a little bit more dirty, you could easily be 2 days. If it's a long, hard route and it's dirty, you could easily be 4 days. That's like 4 dry days. Sometimes there only are 4 dry days in October in the west of Scotland. So you could easily be a month sort of trying that. You know, worst case, you know, you might get good weather and you might get it all done. As soon as I abseiled over the edge of the wall, I could see that the flakes on the wall were totally detached, and one of them, at least 30 feet wide, had recently fallen off by itself, probably in some grim winter storm, leaving a huge scar across the wall. They were so big that pulling them off by hand while climbing could be quite dangerous, and without them, the otherwise featureless wall may be too blank to actually climb. It would also likely mean that there may be no solid protection on the whole 50-metre pitch. I abseiled gingerly down the top third of the wall trying to gauge whether it was at all feasible, and after a while it seemed like just too much of a stretch, and I jumpered back up the rope into the rain which was arriving down the glen. On one level, you might say that I just chickened out. I saw the loose flakes, I saw the lack of protection, and I saw the work that would be involved to clean the route, and I just ran away. However, I don't actually believe this is a bad thing. I have been climbing long enough and seen off enough projects to know that once locked into a project, I have very, very deep resources of motivation, persistence, and drive to see them through, even if it takes years. In other words, I don't tend to run away from a project without a good reason. Chickening out is in fact entirely consistent with that driven approach. In fact, I think that it's a perfectly natural, if not essential, part of the process. In order to enter that locked-in mindset, where you fully identify with exhausting all the moves you can make to complete the project, it can be necessary to feel truly beaten by it, at least temporarily, and to absorb the pain of that feeling. Not entering that locked-in mindset usually makes failure on the project inevitable, if it's truly hard enough to be meaningful and to justify the title of a project. Conversely, entering that locked-in mindset usually makes success on a project inevitable. Therefore, going through the steps necessary to enter this state is the most important part of the entire process. Once this state is achieved, all the other little steps to the finish line just unfold in front of you. The effort and logistics, the learning of the moves, brushing off failures and setbacks, and the final execution of the lead. So I think it's totally fine to take some time to step back and think whether this is the right route in which to place your focus and resources of time, effort, and perhaps considerable risk. So although I did not climb a single move on this venture into the glen, the time and effort was definitely not wasted. Well, it looks like we're about to get wet. Shower is heading down Lochmora pretty quickly, gearing up for a night session back on that route again, see if I can pull some of those flakes off. I'm quite intimidated actually. Well, what am I going to do? I've walked in now, let's get on with it. Sheltering under a roof, a massive hailstorm's just gone through, and this is a great spot to stop for a little while. The buttress I'm climbing on is just up there, not too far. But I dare say the top will be very drippy and very wet. I'm just under this little roof with a nice curtain of drips. So that's the shower that was just over me 10 minutes ago. It's getting its way off towards Lochmora. And that's the crags where I climbed the E8 the other week. And all the boulder jumble below. Just try not to fall off the top of this cliff. Lochmora down there, and then that's where I'm heading. So it's just after midnight. I've just got back to the car from Glenpean. Just changed out of my wet clothes. That was a very, very wet, long evening on the crag. Yeah, it was basically lashing down the whole evening, the whole time I was on the route, and then the whole walk out. And the route itself was just a waterfall. The water was like pouring down the rope and pouring down me. So I couldn't really clean it. All I could really do was pull off some of those loose flakes and kind of inspect some holds and the protection. And I did go a fair bit further down the top pitch than what I did last time, and I just couldn't really see any protection at all. And even looking down below me, I wasn't sure if there was any more protection even further down. So for that reason, I'm actually not sure that I'll get back on that route this year. I may go back to it in the future, but I think it's probably not the first choice of route I would do there. Kind of funny because the last time I went there, I came away kind of really disappointed with myself for not giving it another go. And now having learned a bit more about it, I'm actually totally happy to go, no, that's not the right route. I just needed to gather enough information to know that. The quality of the rock on that wall is not the best in the whole glen, even though it's a very attractive, steep, overhanging wall. But I really needed to put that couple of days of effort in just to find that out. That's just the way it goes when you're trying these long, hard new routes. Sometimes they're just not obvious to start with. The whole time I've been looking across at the big pinnacle, the big steep overhanging pinnacle on the north side, the south facing side of the glen, and I'm more and more attracted to that line. I'd really like to go and abseil down that one and just see if there is a line of holds anywhere on that overhanging wall. The rock looks really clean, and it also doesn't take any drainage, so it seems to just stay dry pretty much all the time. So it has a couple of really big advantages. We'll just have to see if it has holds and gear. There's only one way to find out, which is to go and look, which is what I did today, so I'm happy with my effort today. But I tell you what, like, the rain was just lashing the whole time, so I was beginning to think, goodness, is it time to accept that the trad season for this year is over and I should move on to bouldering? It's always tricky. Like, sometimes things work out really neatly, and when you're doing the kind of all-round thing, and it's like an obvious shift in the weather or conditions, or you doing a route and it's the obvious time to shift to the new season and the new discipline, moving on to bouldering and then winter climbing. Sometimes you kind of find yourself out of sync and you want to keep doing something. Like right now I'm kind of in the mode of trad climbing. I've been doing it quite a lot and I kind of want to keep doing it. But today's weather was definitely saying, no, forget that, it's far too wet now, and also getting quite cold. But we'll see. You only need a high pressure for it to come back, so it's like a balancing act. Like, at what point do you commit to moving on, or at what point do you look at the weather and think, well, maybe if I make progress on this line, there'll be one more good spell and you can do another route. It's always a tricky one. But at least I got to go out in the mountains and see the lovely scenery. The autumn colours are just starting to get good now, and it was lovely to be out today. Also quite amazing to see a little bit of snow on the very tops of the hills. So, there we go. Anyway, I'm going to go home and get to bed. I think hopefully I can get to bed for about 1:30. And tomorrow, I think I might go on my board. I've not been on my board for a long time because I've just been out in the mountains trad climbing. So I am a little bit worried that I'm going to be really pretty weak. So I shall start off with a very gentle board session tomorrow and go from there.